Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. As I said, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm Mindy Crawford. I'm the Executive Director of Preservation Pennsylvania, and I know a lot of you are probably joining us for the first time. Preservation Pennsylvania is a statewide advocacy organization that makes sure that people can protect and preserve the places that they care about by having good legislation, good funding opportunities. We work on policies and programs, provide assistance as needed for people who are working to save those precious historic sites. We are a nonprofit organization, and we thank you very much for those of you who made donations to help us bring you this presentation tonight, as well as other programs. We do rely on the support of private individuals. We don't get any government support for our operations, so we really appreciate folks like you who are making a donation. Please consider supporting us through membership. Sign up for our e-newsletter, check out our website. We have a lot going on. I also want to tonight thank our Zoom webinar platform sponsors, Margaret and Bob Wallace, and also let you know that today, the 2022 Pennsylvania Historic Preservation Awards application process has opened. So if you've got a project that you finished in the last 5 years that might be a good candidate for our awards, please check out the information on our website. Click on the Participate tab and you'll see awards, and that'll take you through to all the information. We're pretty excited this year. 2022 marks 2 very important anniversaries for Preservation Pennsylvania. It's our 40th year of helping people protect and preserve the places that they love, and it's the 30th anniversary of our annual Pennsylvania at Risk list. That brings state attention to sites that are threatened. We work collaboratively with local groups to help change the outcome. Successes and even failures will help us guide our future work. The East Broad Top Railroad was placed on our first list in 1992. The work to save a historic site is long and difficult with lots of ups and downs, and that is certainly the case with East Broad Top. They say it takes an average of 7 years to save a historic site. This was put on the list in 1992, so it's a little bit longer than 7 years. Despite its listing as a National Historic Landmark, there have been many years when we feared the worst for the site. In 2018, I was writing a book about Pennsylvania's National Historic Landmarks. There are 2,600 National Historic Landmarks, 169 in Pennsylvania, and I was asked to choose 100 of them. But there were some very specific criteria about being included in the book. And one of those criteria was that it wasn't in danger of being lost. It was something that people could actually visit. And I really struggled because I really wanted to include East Broad Top because it's such an important place. And as a National Historic Landmark, that's a recognition that it is nationally significant. So I took a deep breath and I included it anyway. And the book was published in 2019, and in 2020, there was an announcement that the East Broad Top was saved. And I was so happy that I was able to include it in the book. I left an opening there that the future was uncertain in 2019, but now we're very happy that in 2020, there was a good outcome. So tonight, I am happy to introduce you to 2 folks who are going to talk about the East Broad Top Railroad. Linn Moedinger, a member of the East Broad Top Railroad Board and a lifelong preservationist, and Jane Sheffield, who is also a board member of East Broad Top and Preservation Pennsylvania. They're going to share the story of East Broad Top and what's up for it in the future. Feel free to type your questions into the Q&A or any comments in the chat box when the presentation is over. We will be doing a little bit of a Q&A. This is being recorded and it will be available for viewing later on this week. So Linn and Jane, welcome all aboard. Let's get started.
All right, thank you. All right, so I guess I'm Linn. Hello, everybody. And welcome to the East Broad Top New Beginnings. One of the things you have to think about with railroads, and particularly with this preservation effort, is that railroads are secondary industries. Basically, they haul stuff from one place to another. And the East Broad Top did that for many, many years. And primarily it hauled freight. So you can see the freight train there on the right. Coal was the major commodity. Ganister was probably second, and then a lot of other stuff that I won't go into, but they also hauled passengers until the roads improved. But keep in mind that railroading as a primary industry, which is essentially what a tourist railroad is a fairly new development. But railroads, really, their strength is connecting places, hauling stuff or people from one place to another. And really, before the automobile, railroads were the way people got around. And the East Broad Top connected with the rest of the world at Mount Union. And right in this area was the old Pennsylvania Railroad main line, which had been located a little bit to the north. So this became more or less the East Broad Top yard. And it's where the Pennsylvania Railroad switched a lot of standard gauge cars. This is a picture taken by my dad of an excursion. I believe it was 1936. And the Mount Union Station is the old Pensy Station, which is just out of sight off to the right of the photograph. So it was kind of an interesting process when we were deciding which locomotive needed to be, or which locomotive would be the best candidate for restoration. I decided to do it by reading the daily inspection reports to see what the locomotives were up to the last 8 years that the railroad operated. And on April 6th, 1956, 17 was the last locomotive that tied up, last train to run. And on the daily inspection report, in great big letters scrawled across the inspection report, it said, "Farewell, Ott." Now, I believe Mr. Ott was the master mechanic who would be responsible for fixing the locomotive. So he had to look at all these reports and see what the defects were and then fix the locomotive. But they figured there weren't going to be any more defects to fix. That was it. And I found it very touching. Farewell, Ott. But then Nick Kowalczyk purchased the railroad, and everybody figured, well, that's the end, because Nick was in the scrap business. And miraculously, he couldn't bring himself to scrap it. And it was like, wow. So nothing much happened for the 4 years from 56 to 60. But then with a local celebration, they asked if they could run a train, and the Kowalczyk said, sure. And they got a train out, and then they proceeded to get a train out for the next however many years, 51 years, for people to ride. And they only rode on a short segment of track, about 4 miles from Rock Hill Furnace or Basonia to up to the old clay spur. That operated until 2012, and then once again the railroad shut down. And in 2020, it was announced that a group of people had purchased the railroad from Joe Kowalczyk, and Joe is Nick's son, and Joe was in the scrap business just like his dad. And he had probably a heavier lift than his dad had to keep the railroad going for half a century. I mean, it was a miracle that by 2020, we had left what we had left. And a great deal of credit is due to the friends of the East Broad Top, because through thick and thin, they've been there. They, had fundraisers, they had volunteers, and of course, when the railroad quit in 2012, it was hard to get volunteers, but there was a core group of people that just kept on fixing stuff up. Joe contributed to that effort while the railroad was shut down. And we owe a debt of gratitude to the Kowalczyks, to the Friends of the East Broad Top, for really keeping this thing alive so that we have so much left to work with. So why is the East Broad Top important? Well, I think these three pictures show why. So there, my dad took a picture in 1940 of the M1. And he was there in 1990 for a spectacular, and he took a picture of it. And then in 2021, I was there and I took a picture of it. And there it is, same M1 percolating along. And that is sort of a microcosm of the East Broad Top, of what has been saved. May need a little work or a lot, but it's there. And that's why it's hugely important. It's original fabric. It is not George Washington's hatchet with 4 new heads and 15 new handles. So what do we have here? We have a railroad that currently, what we control, runs from Alwick all the way down to Alvin. And so you can see there's a number of communities along the way. The red line is essentially what is in operation now. So in the past 2 years, the original tourist line has been resurrected, repaired, and is probably in as good a shape as it's ever been. And trains are running on it. So that in and of itself is pretty remarkable, and we shouldn't discount the fact that we've got that back in service. That is a huge win. But here's the importance of a railroad as a secondary industry connecting communities. And we have an opportunity here to connect. There's just 5 of the communities, although Cooks isn't exactly a huge metropolis, but I put it in there because it was a cool photograph. And these are all photos my dad took. But gosh, we got this artery that can connect all these communities and bring people in to visit the communities and give the communities the opportunity to recreate themselves, generate business opportunities in the communities, and basically will make a thriving little valley out of this whole area. We have that potential, and I just think it's incredible. So sorry, this is the only page that's all writing, but I had to do it anyway. I'm going to read it. Since 1956, when the East Broad Top last operated as a freight hauler, the industries that were the lifeblood of this area slowly drifted away. The revival of the EBT brought some relief, but ultimately the railroad suffered from the very thing that preserved it: isolation. Curiously, east-west transportation arteries, they go by on the north and the south, and there's one north-south connector that sort of bounces off the East Broad Top in around Mount Union, but it's kind of off the beaten path. Raystown Lake is a huge destination for recreation, but it's kind of like over the mountain, and it has been difficult to get people to come from Raystown Lake over to the railroad. So basically, you've got an area of the state that has been slumbering peacefully since 1956. And it doesn't have a nearby population center, no unifying element to the area once the railroad was going, because they're gone, because the railroad is what tied the whole mess together. And there's been no significant enticement, forget the numbers of people needed to reinvigorate the economy. I think the revival of the East Broad Top changes everything because of this connecting of the communities. And there's so many opportunities to do so many things for so many people well beyond the railroad. And that's what this reopening represents. So here's a few things that we're going to run into as we head south. You'll note that the photograph on the left, things seem to be in somewhat better shape than they are in the photograph on the right. Well, the idea is to make the photograph on the right look like the photograph on the left. This is approaching Sidling Hill Tunnel. Again, a comparison, 1941 on the right, 2021 on the left. There's a bit of vegetation to take care of, and that's just the beginning. And then popping out of the other end of the tunnel that the previous train was going into, you can see the rails there if you look carefully on the right-hand photo. But again, lots of work to do. This is one of the communities. It's really not a community at the moment. It's a water tower, but it has the potential to be a wonderful spot. It's between the two tunnels. The water tower is the only original water tower remaining on the railroad, and therefore it is very, very special as far as an artifact goes. And you can see that, again, there's a bit of vegetation that has grown up since the photograph on the left was taken. So I had to write this, not as bad as it looks. I mean, the fact that the bridge doesn't have any ties on it is relatively minor. The bridge was inspected and was actually in very good shape. There's some pier work and some bearing work that needs to be done. But it will be expensive, but it's certainly not as bad as it could be. And there you see an excursion on the left in 1937. This was always a popular spot for railfan photographs. So here, if you look, you can just see the foundation in the lower left photo. That's the foundation for the building on the right, which is the engine house in Robertsdale. The trees have since been removed, so we're getting a little bit closer to having it look like it did in 1941. And of course, Robertsdale, friends of the East Broad Top, have their museum. And so it's be a wonderful way to take people there. You have the Coal Miners Museum. And so the possibility exists to recreate the mine tipple, which is just off to the left of the black and white photograph. So you probably got the drift. Restoration will have its challenges. The other thing that makes this difficult is the EBT exists in a world when labor was cheap and humanity more analog. Steam locomotives are analog creatures. They are not digital in any way, shape, or form. So to properly restore the East Broad Top, we can't make it a digital replica. And so we have the things to deal with like liability. And as I said, you know, back in the day, if somebody tripped over something laying on the ground, they weren't going to sue because they weren't going to get anything. And that makes just sharing the East Broadtop with the general populace, it's a major challenge. You know, we deal with hammers on steam locomotives, not keystrokes. But getting the right people is critical. And that fellow is one of the right people. That's Dave Dimitrovich, and he's the chief mechanical officer. And he's as analog as it gets. He's a good egg. So here you see another analog creature. Not that they don't have cell phones or anything, but that's Brad Esposito. He's the general manager. And he talks with his hands a lot, which is good, but he's explaining to the people the overhead belt system, which is, I don't know of any other place that has such a large example and intact and complete example of an overhead belt system that drives all the machinery. Brad represents the type of people we need to keep the railroad going, to restore it. He spent an awful lot of time up in the rafters getting filthy, realigning the line shafts and so on and so forth, to the point that I believe now all the line shafts do work. They just got the ones in the car shop working. And that in and of itself is an exciting thing to see. And of course, there's the track. So even though it looks like there's two guys sort of leaning on bars, one of them looks like he's maybe not leaning too hard, but when the guy pounds the spike in there, they better be leaning pretty hard. So just think about the last paragraph, 3,000 ties a mile, 4 or 6 spikes per tie. You can do the math. It's a lot of banging on spikes. And I love this, this shot that Matthew took. And I just title it Miracle. Because for those of us that despaired of ever seeing the East Broadtop come alive again, the picture of the Zephyr blazing along the reconstructed track on a foggy morning, that epitomizes what this is all about. However, don't ask when. This was written on the side of number 16 because everybody wants to know, well, when's steam going to run? Well, steam is going to run when it's going to run. Steam locomotives do not like to be awakened when they've been slumbering for a long period of time. They will resist all efforts to wake them up and operate. It's just how they are. So great progress is being made on the steam locomotive. Everything is being done correctly, safely, and we are going to repair number 16. It will not be a rebuild. It will be a repair because she should have a fair amount of life left in her before major rebuild would be required. One of the things we ran into, we had to replace a part of a door sheet inside the firebox. So you can't see the sheet, you're looking at the back head. But between the back head and the door sheet is where the water is that we're boiling to make the steam. So this is cutting out stay bolts so we can replace the plate. And the track. The East Broadtop, even when it was new, didn't have track this good. If you look at the track on the right at Colgate Grove, and you look at the stone pile that it's sitting on, that's how far the track was raised to get a sag out at the north leg of the Y at Colgate. And I can remember backing trains up that leg of the Y, And that sag was a real problem because it created a big grade on the other side. So this is looking really good, particularly from the eyes of an engineer. And then there's Coach 8. And that was a little pet project of mine and a bunch of people that were helping me. Unfortunately, we had a piece of oak that had some sort of a fungus when we made the new end beam for it. The new end beam was not up to the task. So it's ready for its second new end beam, which won't take long, but right now we've been working mainly on the locomotive. You can see there's a little bit of work involved. The Friends have been working on Combine 14 for many years, and this is going to be a rebuild, whereas Coach 8 is a repair job, Combine 14 is a rebuild. And essentially the Friends have taken down their staving as much historic fabric as possible, but they are strengthening the car, and when it comes out, it should be in like new condition. That's Josh Kapp explaining the machinery, and he works on machinery for a living, and he's been working on machinery in our shop and restoring it. And so we have a couple of pieces that can actually run for demonstration purposes. And this is something where I think this is a huge educational opportunity, because to walk into that shop, now, for those of us who are rail fans, and I remember working on number 14 back in the late 80s, and we had it up here in the shop so we could drop the wheels, and walking into that shop every morning, just think back to what maybe you think is historically significant and what you'd like to go back to if you could go back in time. Well, I had the opportunity to go back in time every morning, and that was great. So that about wraps it up. There's the M1 again, looking pretty snappy. Amazing amount of work done in 2 years. And by the way, we had a pandemic. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jane.
Okay, thank you, Lynn. And you can, if you'd like to leave that up, that's fine for a visual, but
I can do that.
well, so back in the late or mid to late 1990s, we worked with the Kowalczyk family and talked about a transition for the railroad. Now, so the state expanded the Allegheny Ridge Heritage Area into Huntington County to incorporate the East Broad Top Railroad, because obviously it's considered to be a jewel. It was endangered, and it was an opportunity to connect that attraction to several other attractions in the region. And we were very, very excited. So even though that did not occur at that time, it was great that we added Huntington County, because then we started doing a lot of work along the Juniata River and managing a national water trail and working with a lot of communities to enhance their recreational and overall systems. So I think that a big part of what East Broad Top is all about is local community development. I think we have so many opportunities to help small communities, many of which have been struggling during the period in which they did not have an operating tourist railroad, and the resulting business from that successful time. So I think when we talk about it being saved, both from two lists, the National Trust for Historic Preservations list, as well as Preservation Pennsylvania, I think this is a super save. I know the board members and staff of Preservation Pennsylvania it's such a delight to be able to check the saved box as opposed to, demolished, gone, etc. But in this case, it is such a joy because not only are we preserving the site, it's being actively used. It's entertaining people. We have the opportunity to educate a lot of people, and we have the opportunity to not only preserve the site, but we also are protecting it. One thing that we've been able to initiate over the past couple of years is a fire suppression system for the shops, which of course is critical for the safety of the people working there and for the actual shops themselves. And so, the Pennsylvania Historical Museum Commission has been very generous with us. And also Southern Allegheny's Planning and Development Commission have connected us with the federal government. And now we are starting to develop a master plan, not only for the shop area, but for the entire site. So that can incorporate, will likely incorporate new venues for events. That's a train ride away. We have an ACE planning and architectural team working with us. One member of the team actually grew up in the area, so is very familiar with the surrounding communities. And we also have involved a local architect from Huntington to work on some of the design elements in the master plan. So we're hoping that this will guide us in terms of looking at how, where we start, where we eventually want to go, and how we fund it. And what I think is so valuable about our board of directors is that everyone is very active. We have folks who are very generous with their resources. And so we were able to start this with private money from generous folks who are passionate about this railroad. And because of that investment, I think that there's been a lot more confidence from both the state of Pennsylvania, and the federal system to actually join in. So we're hoping that with this master plan and with the hard work of Bennett and Levin, who's developing a lot of fundraising pieces, that we're going to be able to, to look at a lot more federal opportunities that will really give us a boost in terms of heading south and potentially in the future heading north. I can't say enough about the Friends of the East Broad Top. They have been amazing. A group that just never gave up. And that not only did they never give up, but now that things are really starting to happen, they're even becoming more generous to the foundation. One big step that has occurred is the creation of an archival program. We have an excellent archivist, Julie Rockwell, who is busy organizing the many yards. I think it's over, I can't remember how many yards, Lynn, I don't know, remind me, over 1,500 yards of material that has been stored in this vault for many years, which is a great thing because a lot of it is in very good shape, but there's a lot of preservation work and just organizing that is now being done. We were able to secure private monies from anonymous donors as well as the Friends resources to start this program. And that's created even more opportunities to partner with folks like Juniata College and to look at other opportunities to present this success in the community in a different way, like looking at an exhibit at the art museum on the grounds of Juniata College. So I think we owe the Friends a lot because they've always been there and they're even more excited now. And so I think that as we say, come and join us in this journey, contribute to Preservation Pennsylvania, contribute to East Broad Top. But I also would suggest that you consider becoming a member of the Friends of the Youth Broad Top, because I think that that it's a valuable group, and it's a great group to belong to, and you get a lot of good information from them on a regular basis, and so I encourage you to do so. So it's certainly an economic engine for this region. I mean, it's sort of a no-brainer if you look at the local community, and anything from hardware shops, to restaurants, to Airbnbs, to even the new hotel facility in Huntingdon has been known to sell out when rides are occurring over a weekend. So there, we know it's very, very apparent that the economic development impact is monumental. I mean, we've had numbers generated from in-plan analysis, and you can rattle through these numbers. They're significant. I mean, this is a game changer, because not only does it draw people to the small community, it draws rail enthusiasts that will then spin out to nearby attractions like the Altoona Railroaders Memorial Museum, the Horseshoe Curve, other driving distances to other railroad related attractions in Pennsylvania. I mean, this and where our proximity to the DC market is very favorable in terms of looking at a weekend trip. And our destination marketing organization, the Huntingdon County's Visitors Bureau, is thrilled about this, and they want to market the heck out of it. They want to see what other sort of potential recreational venues and developments, even associated with like Racetown, could be spun off because of this new development. Folks in the local communities just see this as such a great opportunity. So I'm hoping with our master planning process, we can take a look at these communities and communicate with them and find out what their priorities are, and look at what we can do beyond just bringing warm bodies into the region. What we can do to help them take advantage of it, and also help them maybe get other things that they need in their communities that will make them their housing more valuable, that will make their communities better places to live, from a real bottom up process. So I think that it's going to be very exciting over the next decade to see how this in the long term will impact communities. So as a heritage area, this really just checks all the boxes. It is a dream addition to the connectivity and the work that we talk about with Pennsylvania heritage areas. It has preservation, has community development. It has all the elements in terms of adding to the largest growing segment of America's tourism product, which is heritage tourism. It is something that is, as I said before, just a real game changer for our communities. It is something that eventually who knows what our master plan will tell us in terms of guiding us and looking at other amenities that can be added, while at the same time preserving these shops and protecting them, and getting people on trains and telling them the story, and building new memories for many people who have great fond memories of going with their parents and getting that train ride on a yearly basis, going on the Christmas train, et cetera, et cetera. And now we're able to provide that to new generations. So it's been a wonderful opportunity for our heritage area. It has been great to meet the folks who are working on a daily basis to make all this happen. And it's been a real pleasure and an honor to serve with people on this board who are so willing to volunteer both their time and other resources to make this happen.
Thank you, Lynn and Jane. This is great. We've had a lot of chatter going on, and Saber asked everyone to share their origin stories of when they first saw the East Broad Top. So if you've not been reading those, go through and see some of the stories that have been told, including an engagement or at least a proposal. My first time there was as a school field trip, lived in Burnham, Pennsylvania, and went there with my 3rd grade class. So I have my own origin story, but we do have a couple questions, and I want to start with, I think one of the things that maybe is very, people are always asking this question about narrow gauge. You know, how many operating narrow gauge railroads are there at this time? I've always heard that East Broad Top was the only one east of the Rockies, but someone in the question thought there were 2. So Lynn, are you the expert on that? Can you answer that question?
Well, I'm not sure I'm the expert on it. I mean, there are a number of narrow gauge operations here in the East. And, you know, primarily when people think narrow gauge, they think 3-foot gauge, which is what the East Broad Top is, and they think Colorado, because that was probably the biggest concentration of narrow gauge lines in the country when back in the early part of the 20th century. And right now there's the Durango and Silverton that runs between those 2 towns, and there's Cumbres and Toltec, which is 60-mile railroad from Antonito, Colorado to Chama, New Mexico. Those are the 2 biggies, but you have Georgetown Loop, which is a spectacular ride near Georgetown, Colorado. You have the Sumter Valley up in Oregon. So there's a fair number of them around. I believe the East Broad Top is the oldest east of the Mississippi. But there's no other narrow gauge railroad that is complete. I mean, to the extent the East Broad Top is. Well, we have 6 locomotives in the roundhouse that never knew another home. This was their home from the day they were built. When I read the Boilermakers records starting around 1900, a number of them were received locomotive new at Mount Union from Baldwin, steam tested. So this isn't a collection of stuff that's been brought in from other places. This is stuff that pretty much was here. If it was brought in, Coach 8 obviously was brought in when they bought the coaches from the Boston Revere Beach and Linn, and the 2 combines were as well, as was number 20, but that was way back. So most of their life was spent right here on this railroad, and that is absolutely unique. The completeness and the amount of equipment that is never operated anywhere else.
Great, thank you. Jane, you had mentioned the archives, and we had a question at where are the archives?
The archives are, at this point, it's like 5,000 linear feet of archives at least. The main archives were stored in a vault in the station itself. So there is a former engineering room that they're calling their home, and so they're able to spread out original blueprints, in the station on the 2nd floor, and look at opportunities in the future to be able to have tours of both tours, physical tours, but also the ultimate goal is to digitize the archive system so that people can access it online. So even though there are tons of materials in the vault, there's also a lot of stuff in some of the individual shop buildings. So it's been a very methodical effort to go through all the buildings, extract things that have archival value, and then categorizing them and creating a system for not only that categorization, but also access in the long term.
Yeah, as Lynn mentioned, in terms of the original equipment and original tools, original things that were made just for narrow gauge, plus these archives. I mean, this is just an amazing collection, and so fortunate that it's all still there. There was a question about liability insurance and the reason that the excursion railroad stopped running in 2012. So there was a question about, liability insurance these days. Is that something you can easily get, or is it a big detriment to? If you can't answer the question, that's fine. I just
Well, liability insurance is something that any outfit that opens the doors to the public has to live with. And so, yes, we definitely will end up with liability insurance. And as I said in my presentation, we can't turn this into a Disneyland where there's no tripping hazards, where everything is perfect and pristine, because all the character will be lost. Interestingly enough, I participated in the National Park Study, I think in 1991, and we broke from our meetings and we're headed to lunch, and I was walking with two of the National Park people, and one of the things they said was, you really don't want us to take this over because we will have to sanitize it.
Right.
And so the challenge remains for this group to sort of thread that needle of maintaining as much historic accuracy and at the same time making it accessible, which is very important, and reasonably safe. And that's a big challenge.
Yes. Before we go on to some of the other questions, Saber's been putting links in the chat for the Friends group and for your website, but can you tell us what, when can people ride the train? Do you have a regular schedule? What's happening in 2022 as far as visitation?
Well, I think they're running Wednesdays through Sundays now, but I'm not privy to what the full schedule is. I didn't look. My main efforts have been inside the locomotive and inside the shops, trying to help get the equipment running. So that would be a Jonathan Smith question.
Yeah, and Jonathan did reveal a pretty robust ride schedule for the summer that I would imagine it would be on the website at some point. But another thing that has occurred is that we're getting 4 new coaches, and one will be handicapped accessible, so ADA compliant, and so that's going to be a big step, for us as well. The other attraction, a long-time attraction that we partner with every day is the Trolley Museum. So there are some efforts with the master plan to look at the best ways to integrate those two experiences physically in terms of how people travel through the site. So I think it's nice to have that additional attraction there. And it's also great for the Trolley Museum that this is coming back online, because it's going to really change the game for them as well.
There was a question about whether or not you are in regular contact or collaborate with other railroads like the Nevada Northern Railway. Are you a group of narrow gauge railroads that talk with each other, or?
The heritage rail industry is a pretty close-knit community. And I would say that just about anybody that's been in it any length of time has probably bumped into most other people. And you basically form bonds with people that are maybe struggling with some of the same issues, whether it's, where do you get air brake valves? Where do you get new wheels? Where do you get this, that, and the other thing? And also on a marketing level, what are people doing that work? And so the Heritage Rail Alliance is the industry group that probably represents most of the tourist railroads, heritage railroads. And they, at least before the pandemic, they had in-person spring meetings and fall meetings where we would all get together and there'd be seminars and breakout sessions and so on and so forth. So yeah, we really do try and stay in touch with each other as best we can.
There's a question for you, Lynn, directly. How are the driver centers for 17 going at Strasburg?
The driver centers to 17? Well, we're having driving wheel centers made for 14 and 15. And for some peculiar reason, the middle engines, 14 and 15, it seemed like Baldwin was struggling with the iron they had, because 15, I believe it's 15, if I remember correctly. Mr. Wilburn had me up looking at the thing back in 79, I guess. But it had a cracked cylinder and it's got kind of a girdle on it. And that's from back in the day. And it seems like they were struggling with the iron because they didn't seem to have the problems with that on the bigger engines or with little number 12. So the wheels are finished as far as the castings are concerned, and they're actually going to be steel wheels rather than cast iron. And the new axle material is in. And once we get a slot in the shop, the gang at Strasburg is going to start churning out wheels for us. So that's where we're at.
The questioners apologize for having the wrong number. Okay, and then one other item in the chat that means nothing to me, so I'm just going to say it. Main 2 footers, anyone?
Did you say main 2 footers?
Yes, I did.
Well, the main 2 footers, they were kind of that was fairly unique in this country. They had quite an extensive network of 2-foot gauge lines, and there is an outfit, the Wiscasset, Waterville, and Farmington, and it's a volunteer, almost, I think, started out kind of like an ad hoc organization, but they have been doing incredible work up at I think Alna, Maine. And with all volunteers, they're building a roundhouse now. That is well worth the visit. And then there's also the Maine Narrow Gauge Museum over in Portland and the Sandy River and Rangeley Lakes. But the WWNF it's worth the trip. And if we could have get the amount of work done that they've done, I'd be very happy.
Thank you. So that about covers the questions. If you scroll through the chat, and we will make that available to you as well. People have told some great stories, very complimentary of this site coming back and what it means to the local economy. And we really thank you so much for coming tonight and sharing the story with us. And we are very excited to see what's next. And I can't wait to make my next visit. Thank you all. Good night, everyone.